Let's begin.
Warning. The following broadcast is not approved by your teacher, university, politician, or government. Side effects may include skepticism, better reasoning skills, liberty, peace, and an escape from the woke.
Welcome to the show. I am your host, LB Muniz, and this is the Been Awake podcast for better sense making. If this is your first time listening to the show, we go live every week in X Spaces or Twitter if you prefer. And then the replays go out on all your favorite video platforms and as well as all your favorite podcatchers. You can subscribe to the email list at beenawake.com. And of course, follow me on all social media at the LB Muniz. Welcome to episode 103, from assassination attempt to soft coup. I said, I don't know when I said it on the show. I should start recording when I say things, because sometimes it can be difficult to find them later on. But I had said once upon a time on this show that if anything major was going to happen with this election, with this presidential election that we're coming up against now in just a few short months, if anything was going to happen, it was going to happen in July, or maybe between July and August, because that is when we were going to see the national conventions occur. And in a cruel twist of fate, I was 100% proven right. So today's show, I got a bit of a monologue prepared, and then I also kind of put a timeline together because so much has happened since I even wrote the monologue. I wrote the monologue before Joe Biden resigned from the presidency, not to bury the lead, or from, I guess, not from the presidency, but from running for re-election, which is effectively the same thing in many respects. We're going to get into what I think is going to happen in the aftermath of that. But so I got a bit of a monologue here to read, and then I put together a little timeline because I think it's important that I wanted to sit down and I wanted to record and say what happened and the span in which it happened in, because I think a lot of these things tend to all just jumble together in our minds. Certainly the majority of the media isn't going to do their diligence of here. In many respects, there was an assassination attempt on a president, and it seems like a lot of people aren't interested in that because now suddenly Kamala is running. And that's, I guess, more important to a lot of people. So let's get into it. Now, let's start here, right? This is not, I wish this was, I really do, but this is not a breaking news show. Part of the reason why is because this show isn't a full-time endeavor, and that's totally fine. But the other part, so because of that, there's a design part to that as to why this is not a breaking news show. There are, without a doubt, many numerous outlets that will break news and give you all the hottest of takes you could ever want. We see them every day on social media. Some of those takes will take a hold of people. They'll stick around, but most disappear into the ether to be forgotten or to be clumsily refound when you're searching for something later on. So instead of trying to chase after the latest thing, I chose to make this show concentrated, calculated, something that will give you, the listener, a chance to detach from the cortisol drip of the timeline and zoom out and try to answer bigger questions. Like, what does this all mean? The largest news story from the last couple of weeks is pretty apparent, even with Joe Biden bowing out of the race. There was a failed assassination attempt on the life of former president and current nominee Donald J. Trump. It happened in Butler, Pennsylvania, in the middle of a speech, and only fractions of an inch, dare I say millimeters, separated him from a gruesome death and national disaster. I think, no matter where you quote unquote fall, I do think that's how we should think about the assassination of a prominent politician, as a national disaster. Current reporting indicates that there was a lone shooter who was able to climb onto the sloped roof of a building some 400 feet away from a leading presidential candidate and fire multiple rounds, killing one and injuring two by current reports. There's no other way to look at the situation. Someone didn't do their job. And there's only one organization that should be put under a microscope, the Secret Service. The way in which we now have almost immediate access to cell phone camera footage and media interviews from across the landscape is really something to behold. It's really cool when you think about it, especially when you contrast it to what the news does. Within hours of the attempted assassination, if you were so inclined, you could watch the shots being taken, see the building that was used, that the shooter shot from, and more importantly, watch in real time people calling out to police and Secret Service agents that someone was acting suspiciously. The now former director of the Secret Service, Kimberly A. Cheadle, has quote unquote taken responsibility in true Washington, D.C. fashion by first claiming the buck stops with her, while also saying that the area in question was outside of Secret Service protection. The local police chief, after hearing this, had to refute those claims. And, of course, all the kinds of lies that would have worked 30 years ago fall flat today. She also, it's worth remembering that in the aftermath of this, she claimed that the roof was too slanted and agents would have been unsafe on top of it, as if that makes any sense given the ease at which a shooter got up there. What else? We know the shooter was seen by local police. Maybe we know it was also seen by Secret Service agents now, by the counter snipers. So why was a green light not given to eliminate the threat? Here's the truth. And this is something that not a lot of people want to hear. I believe part of the reason why I like doing the show is I believe we all have an innate desire to understand things that happen, especially things of importance. It's why we've looked for centuries to all different kinds of people for answers as a species. But the truth of the matter is we won't learn anything for the next 30 years. But there are some reports that some of the agents deployed to protect the president were in fact not Secret Service, other than maybe his personal detail. We also know that the Secret Service agents didn't go to a security briefing, that there were issues with the channels of communication between local PD and the federal agents. Certainly, this seems like a lot of coincidence if you ask me. But Cheadle had the support of the Biden administration, and the connected media outlets she put herself in front of would only protest too much. And in fact, it wasn't until she stood in front of Congress that she realized she wasn't going to weather the storm. Millions of us in the 21st century grew up playing war games. Every boy loves to play cops and robbers. Most young men go through a phase, if not their entire lives, studying famous military operations and different strategies that law enforcement and other military units use to take out a threat. So even the most casual of video game players has tried their hand at being a sniper. And I think if you were to show the most casual of amateurs a layout of the rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, I'd bet good money the majority would say that that building needed to be secured. So why wasn't it? The failed assassination occurred just days before the Republican National Convention. That event, as usual, culminated in a speech given by the nominee, Donald Trump, a speech that lasted 1 hour and 35 minutes, and if you asked me, went a little long. Donald Trump detailed how he felt the bullet pierce his ear, and he laid out his agenda for the next 4 years should he be elected. For what it's worth, other than the length, I thought it was one of the best speeches Trump has given throughout his public life as a politician and presidential candidate. Gone was the freewheeling bravado that has marked his rallies, and instead, I really do believe that America was presented with a sober and, dare I say, humble Donald Trump, still fresh from his brush with death. Now, a quick diatribe. Trump has never been my ideal candidate. In 2016, I was, without a doubt, worried about the ramifications of such an uncouth person taking over the presidency. I was worried about the alleged parallels made to dark figures in human history. What occurred through his presidency, however, was, until the COVID pandemic anyway, fairly standard. Corporate tax cuts and deregulation helped businesses marginally, and the worst case scenario didn't happen. All this fuss over nuclear suitcases and the arms code and our standing on the world stage, and yet We all went to work in the morning, and dare I say, those were some pretty good years for a lot of people, certainly people in my circles. There were some other people that were maybe upset, given the fact that I live in a state like Illinois. Some people were upset that some of the tax cuts didn't benefit them as much. But by and large, most people, certainly in the business world, enjoyed and had a cash flow. And frankly, that's probably part of the reason why I got hired at the job that I have now. What was real and what remains real about the Trump presidency was the reaction against him, the spurious investigations, the media onslaught, the riots and rebellion from within the Republican ranks led many feeling a sense of relief and so-called normalcy when Biden took the helm. It's been very easy for most people who were not Trump supporters to think of him as the bumbling buffoon who stumbled his way into a billion-dollar empire. It's a very common media trope that I've talked about and covered in some great deal because they do the same thing to Elon Musk. Here we have some corporate journalist pulling in a meager to decent salary, talking about how some of the richest and most brilliant people on earth, whether you like them or not, I don't have to like Bill Gates to not think that he has some sort of acumen and tenacity to him in order to amass the billions that he has. The same goes for a Steve Jobs, a Jeff Bezos, and Elon Musk, as I said before. And yet it's passable. It passes editorial review that people will write and say that these people are more or less stupid until they buy like a newspaper or something. The caustic nature of Donald Trump's personality repels many, especially given his financial status. Such a man would have few redeeming qualities, and that was enough for a sensibly minded American to ignore him when he disappeared from the stage and to believe the things told about him in the press. Personally, it was difficult. It was difficult for me to move from these negative presuppositions of Trump. I don't think that Trump is some magical savior, for the record, but clearly he is not the two-dimensional image presented by his detractors and supporters alike. He is still a politician, and like most politicians, his promises will outweigh his deliverables. But that's not the standard I think works for politics in the 21st century, and certainly that's not the standard I take with politics and politicians anymore. I've laid out the idea that we find ourselves in the grips of a cult, the cult of American democracy. Therefore, the assumption for those of us who will participate in some fashion with the political trends has more to do with direction than it does with actual policy or empty campaign promises. Trump, for better or for worse, breaks many of the frames that the cult of American democracies has put in front of good Americans on the left and the right. Consider briefly the idea of decency that Biden supposedly embodies and that Trump stands in opposition to, and now that'll be Kamala. Trump, with all his faults and multiple marriages, built an empire in the private sector that his family benefits from, while Biden has allegedly sold access to himself in the halls of American political power through his son and arguably other avenues. Moreover, Biden and his confidants have attempted to hold on to the reins of power so tightly they lied to the American people for months, if not years, about his declining mental state. A literal subversion of democracy. Allow me to digress to make a final point. Recent reports have indicated that many on the left and elsewhere believe that Trump staged his assassination attempt. It's taken me a few days to understand where this desire comes from. Why is it that people who, I'm talking people in my life who are not the types of people who indulge in any kind of conspiratorial thinking, and yet they say, I'm not sure, something stinks about this. Something does maybe stink about this, but we'll get into that. I think maybe he did it. In the first place, conspiracies abound when people don't have the proper framework to process a significant event. This is one of the reasons that while I will indulge in speculation, I try to never deal in conspiracies. The skeptical response of "I don't know" is powerful as an observer of current events when there are so many layers between us and the truth of what happened. I think part of the reason why people can't believe that the events of the assassination attempt occurred are twofold. In the first case, there is still a profoundly held belief in the institutions of our country, especially amongst the moderates and most of the left wing. It is inconceivable to people that incompetency could abound at such high levels in such high places, especially when it comes to protecting presidential candidates. The second reason is more basic. If you've bought into Trump as a coward, an empty braggart who has no principles or redeeming qualities, you cannot understand the iconic reaction in the aftermath of the shooting. There wasn't a stampede in the crowd, and Trump didn't cower and slink away like most politicians. He didn't act the way his perception given to us by the media would have us thinking he would react. Instead, he stood defiantly in the face of danger and told his people to fight. In moments of extreme duress, people learn who they are, and in turn, we can learn who other people are. For whoever else Donald Trump is, he's not a coward. And that should make his enemies and the left-wing elements who oppose him very afraid. And those of us who oppose the progressive liberal agenda, it should make us happy. Hopefully, he now has a new perspective on the importance of his run for the presidency. With luck, we're not dealing with the Donald Trump of 2016. We're dealing with the Donald Trump who has faced an onslaught of negative press, weaponized investigations, prosecutions, lawfare, and now a literal attempt on his life. None of this has softened his resolve. Maybe then he's not the man we were led to believe. I don't know. Those powerful words, I don't know. It took me a while. I couldn't figure that out. Why is it? Why? I get the whole oh, maybe this was staged. No, this was clearly something that happened. It was clearly something that was either allowed to happen or something that because they don't it's kind of like, if you have a customer that you don't care about, you're not you have a customer that's nice people, right? A lot of people have customers. A lot of people deal with nice people. A lot of people deal with jerks. If you have a nice person sitting across from you in a business environment, you're more likely to help them out. But if you have somebody sitting across from you who's kind of an ass, you're not as likely to send your best people, your best resources, or offer your best advice to them. It's just human nature. And so I really do think that part of the reason why a lot of people are more afraid of the reaction to a Trump presidency than they are with Donald Trump himself. And I think that's part of the reason why people thought that the assassination attempt was staged or whatever. James, I see you hanging out. If you want to jump in, let me know. Request to speak or whatever. If not, I'm going to continue on. So I did put together, like I said, the second half of the show is just going to be a little timeline for us to play with. Where again, I covered the debate, so I'm going to kind of blow through that, and I obviously just talked about the assassination attempt through the Republican convention. But so I thought it would be a good idea for us to do this. So where do we start the clock? One of my favorite things to talk about. So the first place we can start the clock is the first presidential debate, which happened on June the 6th, 2024. Biden appeared tired, old, and incoherent at times, and Trump was better than normal given that he, played by the rules. I went on before, briefly. I've talked about this, so I don't want to go too long. But I was on beforehand, and I said that I think that no matter what goes on during this, debate, they're just basically going to say Trump talked over Biden. Instead, what ended up happening was the headline wasn't that. The headline was that Biden lost, not that Trump won. because they can't give it to him after all, in any sense of the word. So the rules were seemingly in favor of Biden, making it difficult for Trump to steamroll him. But what happened in the aftermath was that Biden was often struggling to fill up the 2 minutes of response time. Almost instantaneously in the corporate press, the narrative went to commonly held questions about Biden's age and competency. They claimed they were lied to and led astray by the Biden administration. And in particular, there was one tweet that I want to pull up here by, I believe she's a CNN reporter, if memory serves my brain well. She was a CNN reporter, and let's see here. Where is this? It's kind of crazy. It was like everybody suddenly talked about the fact that he was going crazy. Jill Filipovic said this. Sorry, I'm trying to click on it and didn't want to do. I should have copied and pasted. There we go. So Jill Filipovic. At some point, I'll write longer on this. I don't know if she ever did. I'm not particularly interested in figuring that out. At some point, I will write longer. But she writes that, whatever. At some point, I'll write longer on this. But it's but I think part of the reason of the Biden must go story has been so huge that a lot of commentators and voters and even members of the press, the reason why is that they feel angry and betrayed. Many of us largely trusted Biden's team when they insisted he was fine. This was tweeted out on July the 3rd, 2024. Initially, I think many of us felt some combo of pity for Biden and fear for the future. Now I think there's rising resentment to be had. She continues, to be clear, the Biden team could fully weekend at Bernie's him or send 3 toddlers or send, what does it say? Or send 3 toddlers in a trench coat to the next debate, and I would still vote Biden over Donald Trump and will encourage everyone to do the same. But like, not ideal, she says. And journalists, she continues, have very much looked into the question of how Biden's age is impacting his abilities and reported on how voters are worried about it. They've also been accused of making up a non-issue, of being ableist, of being facilitating a Trump win, on and on. And in the meantime, Biden's team has made him available for fewer interviews than any president since Reagan. I do think some journalists learned the lesson of the but her emails disaster and have tried to moderate on the age question, looking more deeply at the existential threat that Trump poses, looking more deeply at that threat. But now the age issue is fully out in the open and undeniable. Well, the age issue was undeniable for months, years, depending on who you want to talk to. That's for any of us paying attention, at least. So that's what happened in the aftermath of the debate. 9 days later, so Biden goes on and he gives a speech. He gives a decent speech in Madison, Wisconsin. But then 9 days later, he goes on and is interviewed by George Stephanopoulos. In that interview, he called it a stupid mistake. He said it wasn't something that he meant to do, but that his long career in Washington should be something that we look to as a counter to this dastardly mistake that happened. He had a bad night, folks. It wasn't that big of a deal. So that was 9 days after that. He also said in that interview that he meets with doctors regularly, and if they told him he couldn't do anymore, or if God Almighty came down to listen to him, he would listen to him and maybe drop out of the race. Well, I don't know if the Lord Almighty decided to send his angels to Joe Biden, but I do think Barack Obama got to him. 8 days later, 7/13/2024, the 13th of July, 2 days before my birthday, an attempted assassination of Donald Trump occurs. You've seen the video. We've all watched it. We all hopefully were affected by it. I certainly was. there's a tendency. It's kind of like if you're not too online, good for you. But if you're not too online, you might be unfamiliar with like the phrase "nothing ever happens." And I see it out there a lot, but my focus is not on the people who think nothing is ever going to happen. I kind of think this is like a show from the right facing the center. Like I know where I stand on issues. I know where I think people are going, but I don't necessarily try to swim farther out. I don't try to push the boundaries. I try to do something that I think anybody could listen to, if you take just a little bit of time to open up your mind and move beyond your presuppositions. Because that's at the core of what I do on a daily basis. So the assassination attempt, as I said before, was a massive failure in security, whether through willful oversight or just sheer incompetency. It also produced one of the most iconic political pictures of the 21st century, at least so far, of Trump getting up over his protection detail, yelling, "Fight, fight, fight." I also wonder if that would have happened if they didn't have like a 5'8" woman in front. I don't mean to be rude. I just don't think that women should necessarily be Secret Service agents on protection detail. I don't think most men should be Secret Service agents on a protection detail. It's not something that I won't want to do. I'd much prefer to be the person protected by bodyguards, not the bodyguard itself. But I sincerely salute people who think that that is their calling in life. But so it's funny how like in that one moment, if they had just had, if everybody was like the same height of Trump, would that moment have occurred? Right? It's interesting how these little things fall into place to create history, and we witnessed history in real time. It's important to remember in the initial aftermath, the media chose to run with the line that there were loud noises at the event and Trump fell. And I kid you not, 17 minutes before I started recording, the Chicago Tribune breaking news page sent out a post on X that, wouldn't you know it, the FBI concluded that Donald Trump was shot in the ear by a bullet. Now that there's an official source, I guess they can change their tune. But if you went looking, and you can find them, ask me, I'll send them to you. There were countless headlines that were talking about how he fell, there were loud noises, we don't know what happened, which was clear to everybody else who watched that footage. Clearly somebody took a shot. Clearly it hit President Trump. Don't know how bad or what the condition of him would be. What we currently know is that the Secret Service purposefully, or again through sheer incompetence, did not secure the roof of a building a normal shooting distance away. Local PD and civilians noticed the shooter but were unable to get a message to the Secret Service due to coordination problems, and there were reports that inadequate support was sent to provide security and that the Secret Service was not even present at the briefing. The director, after blaming local PD and who pushed DEI measures, not to be quibbled with, has resigned after sitting in front of Congress for testimony. 5 days later, on the 17th of July, 2024, Biden tested positive for COVID-19. I guess he should have gotten vaccinated. Biden will not be seen in public after boarding Air Force One for multiple days after this. 6 days later, and he tweets out his official release at that time was that he has COVID, but that he's still able to do his job of presidency while isolating himself. And then a couple days after that, this weird, like right around the time that all these reports are circulating that he's going to step down, but he hasn't yet, that he's not going to run for re-election, but he hasn't quite done that yet. This weird official release goes out that delegates power from the president to various secretaries in his administration. So 6 days later, or I guess this would be, 1 day later, 1 day after Biden was tested positive for COVID-19, President Trump gives a speech at the RNC. Now, again, I'm not going to indulge in conspiracy theories, but it is convenient speculating here It is convenient that they said he was sick one day before Trump was going to give a speech because, of course, don't pretend for a second that campaign managers and the smart people in the Democratic Party and on the left side of the aisle were paying attention to what Trump's speech went like to get a sense of his state of mind. So Biden tests positive for COVID-19. One day later, Trump gives his speech. Trump also, before this, nominates J.D. Vance as his VP pick. By some reports, and I don't care, I'm going to make this the narrative, he was going to choose somebody else, somebody more in line with the establishment before the assassination attempt. Vance, for whatever faults he might have, is a clear signal away from establishment Republicans of business as usual in Washington and towards a hopefully more America first future, or at the very least, a more Trump future. During his speech, he recounts his feelings and experience during the shooting, and he refrains smartly in this case from naming Biden in his speech. And while I think he trailed off towards the end, like I said before, he hit the long address was a slight dig at Biden because he can talk, and as a lot of people said, well, when you get shot, you get to finish your speech afterwards. And I guess that's fair. And as I said before, the opening segment was heartfelt and the most serious and presidential I think I've ever seen Donald Trump look. He made it a point to name the people who were killed. It would have been very easy. I think, I don't know. Again, like part of that monologue, right, is like, can we reframe how we think of Donald Trump, even if we don't like him? Because I was somebody who didn't like him for a long time. I'm not even sure I like him now, but damn it, he's entertaining. And I see no other course. I see no other direction to go in terms of popular politics, right? If we're going to engage in the popular political conversation, as I laid out in a previous episode, I think you have to choose a side. Even if myself of 5 or 6 years ago would have shuddered at the thought. But I also think deep down, I always knew that. 3 days later, on the 21st of July, Biden releases a letter saying he will not seek re-election. It was not a White House statement. It wasn't an official statement, right? It was something, I didn't even think about that when it happened, but I went looking for the letter for my notes for this episode, and I'm like, where the heck is this thing? I can't find it anywhere on whitehouse.gov, on the POTUS page. No, it was posted to his personal page. In it, he says, quote, "It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve as your president. And while it has been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term." In the lead up to this, my phone every day would send me multiple notifications from various news outlets of this Democratic politician or that Democratic politician. Anybody else find it interesting that Nancy Pelosi in particular was constantly mentioned throughout this? Like, I thought she was out of Congress. Clearly, she's like Obama makes sense because he was a president, I guess. But it is a interesting signal to where power still lies within the popular parties in this country, that Nancy Pelosi's name and in turn Barack Obama's name was mentioned so much in these things, and how even the Clintons were not as prevalent. While not said in the letter, it comes out that he has endorsed Kamala Harris for president. And again, he wasn't seen publicly for many days. I think what's interesting about this is I wonder if this is because there's a couple of reasons, right? It's possible he doesn't completely understand what's going on. It's possible he didn't write the letter, sign the letter, release the letter. He's just reading a speech, and maybe they turned off, because we'll get to some remarks. And then 3 days later, and then we'll get into this. 3 days later, on the 24th of July, Biden releases an address from the Oval Office, effectively dropping out of the race. And he says this: "In recent weeks, it's become clear to me I needed to unite my party in this critical endeavor. I believe my record as president, my leadership in the world, my vision for America's future all merited a second term, but nothing can come in the way of saving our democracy. That includes personal ambition. So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation. That's the best way to unite our nation." In just a few months, the American people will choose the course of America's future. I made my choice. I have made my views known. I would like to thank our great Vice President, Kamala Harris. She's experienced, she's tough, she's capable. She's been an incredible partner to me and a leader for our country. He goes on to talk about how some of the things he wants to tackle in the last months, in particular, is Supreme Court reform. It's interesting. I didn't know the Supreme Court needed reform. Certainly, I didn't think the Democrats thought that. But of course, it seems to me a clear signal that now that he doesn't have to worry about re-election, he can do what every good Democrat does and pack the courts. Heaven forbid there is any sort of conservative thought given in the highest court of the land. Heaven forbid people who think the Constitution is a good idea should serve on the highest court in the land. It's an interesting and dangerous road ahead, that's for sure. On the 26th of July, day before I record this episode, Kamala Harris releases her first presidential campaign ad where she's not running to save the soul of the nation the way that Biden was. No, instead, she's running on the message of freedom. So here we are, standing in the aftermath of what is at the very least a soft coup. And here's the truth. The Democrats don't care. Your average Democrat, they might not like it. They may not think it was the best way to do it. They might wish Biden had stepped out of the race before, but they don't care. There's a lot of wasted air right now being given to the media narrative that, lo and behold, conservatives first. This is hypocritical. They say Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, but they don't do any. But Kamala Harris wasn't democratically elected. They don't care. They may not like Kamala. They may not think she's a good person, a good candidate. Forget the young people who are going to hype this, who are like, there's like this weird hype thing going on with TikTok. It's going to fall away in a couple of months. I'm not entirely convinced Kamala Harris is going to be the eventual nominee. I've said for a while, I think a Clinton v. Trump 2024 is not the America we need, but the America we deserve. But I've looked at these statements, right, as I was getting ready for this episode. I've looked at the statements that Biden has given recently, and something stands out to me. He doesn't explicitly come out and say much, does he? He says he's going to pass on the torch to a new generation. Okay, that could be symbolic. He says, I believe it is in the best of my part for me to stand down and focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president. But then he also says America's going to have a choice in a few months. Does he not come out and endorse Kamala Harris because he's not sure whether she's going to stand for president, or because he doesn't fully understand that he's actually not running for president anymore? And what does that mean for the last few months? Why doesn't he resign? These are all the thoughts of normal people right now. And they're looking around and trying to figure out, why does none of this make sense? And the answer, my dear friends, is because it's not about making sense. It's about you complying with them. But that's not what we do on this show. This show, we try to make sense. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. Do me a favor, if you would be so inclined. Go to beenawake.com, subscribe with your email address, and follow me on social media at the LB Muniz.
If you like what you heard today, go to beenawake.com to subscribe for future updates. My name is LB Muniz, and I am not one with the woke.